Hello friends, let's compare Lululemon and Nike. Let's find out which of those companies is a better investment opportunity right now and what are the main differences and similarities between those two great businesses. If after watching this video you would like to learn more about Lululemon or Nike, I made videos analyzing those companies and you will find links to them at the end of this video. Okay, let's get started. Individual insiders own 3.6% of Lululemon and 20.7% of Nike. So when it comes to the management having its skin in the game, Nike is a clear winner. And are individual insiders buying recently? That is an X for Lululemon and also an X for Nike. Individual insiders are not buying shares of those companies in the recent months. And do super investors own those companies? There is one super investor owning Lululemon shares and 9 super investors owning shares of Nike. So it's a check for Nike. And are super investors buying recently? That is a check for Lululemon and it is also a check for Nike. So the final score when it comes to investors is 1 point for Lululemon and 3 points for Nike. Return on invested capital. It is 25.3% for Lululemon and 24% for Nike. So it is a check for Lululemon, but the difference is really small. And net profit margin, it is 14.2% for Lululemon and 10.6% for Nike. So it's another check for Lululemon. And now let's take a look at share buyback. Lululemon bought back 11.8% of its shares in the last 10 years and Nike bought back 13.6% in the same time. So it's a win for Nike. And how many years will it take for each company to pay back its debt? Well, for Lululemon it is 0 years because they don't have any debt. And for Nike, it's a bit over 1 year. So it's a check for Lululemon, even though Nike also seems to have its debt under control. And the final score when it comes to the financial health is 3 points for Lululemon and 1 point for Nike. Revenue growth of Lululemon is 19.7% and for Nike it is 6.3%. So it is a check for Lululemon and the difference is very visible. Free cash flow growth for Lululemon it is 25.3% and in case of Nike it is just 6%. And that is of course a check for Lululemon. And finally, when it comes to growth, let's take a look at earnings per share growth. Lululemon is growing by 20.4% and Nike by 9.6%. So it's another win for Lululemon. And so the final score when it comes to growth is 3 points for Lululemon and 0 points for Nike. The dividend yield for Lululemon is 0% because this company does not pay any dividends currently. And for Nike it is 2%, so it's a check for Nike. And actually Nike will get all the checks when it comes to dividends because in this category they just don't have an opponent. So the payout ratio is 0% for Lululemon and 36.6% for Nike. So that is a nice payout ratio. This dividend seems very sustainable. And lastly, the dividend growth in the last 5 years. It is of course 0% for Lululemon and 11% for Nike. And that is a very impressive growth. Now, if you would like to learn more about dividend investing, what are the benefits and what are the risks, which data we should concentrate on when choosing a dividend investment, and all that fascinating stuff, then check out my course that will teach you all you need to know to get started as a dividend investor. The link is in the description below. So the final score concerning the dividend is 0 points for Lululemon and 3 points for Nike. And now let's try to compare the valuations of both companies. And to do that, we will use an average intrinsic value per share that was calculated in my videos in which I analyzed those companies. And those prices include, of course, a 30% margin of safety. So the average intrinsic value per share of Lululemon is around $279, and the current share price is closer to $281. So that is an X because the current share price is higher than the average intrinsic value. So the company is overvalued, but the difference is minimal. And when we look at Nike, we see that the average intrinsic value is around $40 and the current share price is at $73. So it is also an X. But now let's look at the percentage difference between current share price and the intrinsic value. And for Lululemon, it is only minus 0.6%, and for Nike, it is minus 45.2%. The difference between the current price and the intrinsic value is much smaller for Lululemon, so it is a win for them. And the final score for the valuation is 1 point for Lululemon and 0 points for Nike. So now let's take a look at the final results. Investors, it is 1 point for Lululemon and 3 for Nike. Financial health, 3 points for Lululemon and 1 point for Nike. Growth, 3 points for Lululemon and 0 points for Nike. Dividends, 0 points for Lululemon and 3 points for Nike. And valuation, 1 point for Lululemon and 0 for Nike. So the final score of our little game is 8 points for Lululemon and 7 points for Nike. But what is worth pointing out are the differences between those two businesses. They are definitely at different stages of their journey. We have a much better situation when it comes to investor sentiment, when it comes to Nike. Lululemon has just slightly better financial health, but when we look at the growth, the difference is huge. Lululemon is trying to take as much market share as possible, and Nike is a much bigger and stable business, and it is trying mainly to defend its market position. So the growth is much slower, but a bigger and more matured business that does not have to put so much cash into its growth can pay dividends and create value for investors that way. And that is exactly what we see when it comes to Nike. So if we would not look at the valuation, it would be a draw. Those companies are different, but both have their advantages. But as investors, we have to understand what a business is worth and then compare this value to its current price. So it is not an easy decision. And of course, we have to remember that these results are very simplified. That, like I said before, this comparison is a bit like a game, and we have to always do our own due diligence before making any investment decisions. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next one.